So maybe you want to start out in the Archviz industry as a freelancer, but you have no idea how to start, when it comes to how much to charge, how long to take, the different phases that actually go into a project. So I've actually been doing this for quite a few years now, and I'm going to help out by giving you a few pointers as well as my full pipeline for how I start a project, all the different stages, and even the email that you need to write to be able to actually land your first client. It's actually really important when you first start out that you have a really good foundation of what makes a really good render, the kind of time of day that you'd actually want to be doing, like, whether it's a sunset or a midday kind of shot, different commercial shots. It really depends on the kind of project that you want to be doing. So it's really important to specialize in what you enjoy doing because you're going to get the best result out of it. And if you're just kind of getting into Archviz, I do have a lot of free resources on my YouTube channel, and there's also a free Discord, and there's a link in the description if you want to share your work and kind of grow as a 3D artist. So assuming you can produce consistently good renders, the first step is to actually understand what the client is looking for. So your first part of the email should look like this. And I usually start by sending them a list of items to get from them from the initial interaction. So let's start with the mood board. This can be really challenging for clients to actually find the perfect images that show what they're trying to achieve. So you might need to just get, help out with this to get the right images. It's really important that you actually spend the time and get the perfect images because it's actually the foundation of your renders. And if for some reason that the client doesn't like the renders at the end, as long as you have followed your mood board, it really isn't on you that they don't like the final result. So if your client's an architect, they'll probably have a mood board already. So it should be pretty easy, hopefully, to get this. But if your client doesn't have a mood board yet, you could ask them to create a Pinterest board with images. So the mood board should actually include a few lighting and time of day examples, and also a few projects of similar design with materials that the client actually wants to match, and any other useful images like landscaping or even furniture. What you really want to sign off at the beginning is the time of day and material selection. And from this mood board, you should be able to, achieve this pretty well. So the next item that you want from them is the type of project, which is hopefully pretty clear from the mood board that you ask them to create. You ideally just want a short sentence of the type of project, including whether it's commercial, retail, residential, and even like the size of the job. So like you might get a GFA, which is gross floor area, or even the amount of floors or levels if it's like a commercial job, because it actually impacts how much time is spent on, doing all the furniture and, all that kind of stuff. And you can also find out if this is the kind of job that you'd want to take on. Because if it's like a skyscraper or something and you've got this little potato of a computer, you're actually not going to be able to render this out. So it's really important to be specific about this and pick and choose. I do understand though, if it's like your first job and it's your first client, then you can't really be super picky, but you also need to make sure that you can deliver. So just pay careful attention to this. And now at this stage, we also want to understand what the time frame is that the client needs the renders by. If they've got a massively unrealistic deadline, then you can let them know pretty much straight away that it's not possible before investing too much time in understanding the project further. You should also have a pretty good understanding of how long it takes to produce a render from a new project, so you can let them know if this is something that they can actually work with. But don't confirm anything at this stage. We can do this after receiving, all the information from the client in our return brief, which I'll cover shortly. So next, we actually want to ask the client whether they have a 3D model in the format you can use, or if this is something that you will actually need to model. Some Archviz artists model all the architecture, while others specifically only render a pre-finished, pre-modeled building. So it actually totally depends on your preference. I personally request the client to provide a fully modeled building with all the materials applied and everything in either FBX or OBJ format. And that means that I can just swap out with high quality materials, and it just makes my job as a Archviz artist a lot more streamlined so that I can focus on the things that I actually enjoy doing. In the first email, I state that while minor adjustments can be made within Blender, which is the rendering software I use, by the way, The model they send through should be complete with all materials applied to the architectural elements. And something specific in this question is to make sure that they have 3D cladding added, which most CAD software can achieve. If they don't, it's worth understanding whether this is something that you can actually do, or if the client doesn't need this level of quality, it's probably just fine to swap out the materials on the geometry without actually messing around with 3D cladding like roofing and walls and tiles and that kind of thing. So the last question is to ask if there are any special requirements for the project, like furniture, landscaping, species, or any design features that need specific attention on. Sometimes the client will be sending these renders to get design approval from the local council. So there needs to be specific elements just right, and that actually means a lot more time is spent on getting these just perfect. So it's important to capture this from the get-go. As a side note, the client might actually have an idea on the camera views already and whether they'll need exterior or interior renders or both, because it's really important to make sure you understand what's involved, because if it's an exterior, you need to do a lot more landscaping, but if it's an interior, then you actually have to do a lot of furniture and fine-grained details, and they both take different amounts of time to complete. So this is what your first email should look like, with the bullet points of what you require to give them the price and the time frame. And assuming they reply back with the above information, you can assess the mood board images or help them create one if they need it, the type of project, the time frame, and the state of the 3D model, and whether you need them to change anything to make it renderable, and any special requirements if there are any. Now, everyone will have different time frames for a project, but it can really help to look at the phases of an Archviz job to understand how much time may go into each stage so that you can plan your time more effectively. The phases of a project for me would look like this. We've got stage 1, which is draft white card renders, which is approximately 1 week. Stage 2 is draft colored views, which is 1 week. And then stage 3, which is the final renders, which is also a week. So let's jump into what each of these stages are actually comprised of. So for stage 1, we've got, low resolution white material views. And we try to pick out quite a few different camera views. You might have like 5 or 10. That to give the client, and they can kind of tick a few off and take those further. And you also want to implement the time of day from the mood board references, and also any landscape elements. And you also want to allow for a review and feedback session. There might be multiple. It's actually quite likely there would be maybe 1 or 2, maybe 3. So you make sure to allow for a few rounds of feedback in this stage, and also any sign off on the camera and lighting. But the trick for this stage is to give them plenty of draft camera views to pick from, and it's really important to look at the images on the mood board and match any key views that you can find here. So moving on to stage 2, we've got the draft colored views, which are low resolution with the materials that are from the material palette / mood board. And also I personally like to add some draft post-production, so like color grading and a little bit of brightness and contrast in this. So it's quite a small stage, but it's really important to get sign off on the materials. You might have 2 to 3 rounds of feedback for this just to get it perfect, but hopefully if you've set the email up correctly and you've got the right initial information, this should be pretty smooth sailing. So at the end of this, we want to finalize all materials and landscaping, and ideally there are to be absolutely no additional changes to this in the next stage, which is stage 3, final renders. So in this, we're literally just exporting the final full resolution renders. You might do 1080p or 4K. It's probably worth actually asking the client what they want, as this would take more time to render out, and that's something that you should allow for in the charging. So yeah, it's just really straightforward. We're basically just pressing F12 and then doing our final color grading. Once you do this process a few times, you'll become really effective with time, and it'll actually get easier and easier. You will also understand how long these will take, so you'll be able to provide a price for your client much easier. And in order to figure out how much to charge, I use this simple equation. So we've got price, which is the hours required, so the actual time spent on the job, including review time and rendering time, times your hourly rate. And that's actually something that you need to figure out yourself. which is totally dependent on the amount of experience you have, as well as what locally people charge. So just have a think about what you want to do for that, plus your expenses, which is electricity, subscriptions, assets, any furniture you might need to buy for the project, plus tax. So if we're assuming this project is taking 40 hours, that's 40 times 50 if your hourly rate is 50 US, plus 50, which is the electricity, subscriptions, and then plus tax, which is 2665. It's really important to think about tax because that actually plays a big role in I guess how much profit you're going to get. So as I said before, your hourly rate is highly dependent on where you're living and what skill set and level of experience you have. And it is also highly subjective. You actually set this. People might not want to go with you because you're so expensive, but this is actually up to you. If you want to charge per image, by the way, which is probably quite typical, this 2,665 ticket price is actually really high if you were just to do one render. So it's worth understanding what the client wants in terms of price, and while you set the price, it's worth understanding what the expectation is. I would recommend just doing a per image render cost, and you hopefully might get like 2 to 3 renders out of it, which is, if you charge say 500 per render, that's 1,500. So it just totally depends on how many renders you're doing, and if you're doing a lot of renders for the client, you might just want to do a per project price, just to kind of give them a bit of a incentive to go with you. But just kind of have a play around with it, try different pricing scenarios, and this is something that you'll actually adapt to over time. And as your skill set gets better, as you get more and more business, you can start to increase these prices up. But when you're first starting out, it's, and you don't have any projects, you might want to just play around with a lower price just to get your foot in the door, so to speak. But I hope you found this really useful. And if you want to just get started in Archviz, you can check out all my free courses on YouTube. And as I said before, I've got that Discord. There's a link in the description. I hope you found this useful, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.